Hey there, everyone. Welcome back. There's Mandy. All right, we're just waiting for Dr. Wood here. And let's see where she is. You guys, the learning curve is a little crazy with this whole thing. And as you can see, I've been sharing with you guys for a while. I switched to my laptop instead of my big screen so that I'm actually looking at you. Let's see where Dr. Wood is. Thought I saw her. What I'm going to do, though, is go ahead and get started. I don't want to fall behind again. So this is Home for the Holidays, and we're discussing childless holidays, which initially this was conceived of because I was thinking of people going through fertility treatment and what that looks like going through that or dealing with infertility and not having children for the holidays, which is difficult enough. And then we have the pandemic and you can't really be with family anyway. It's kind of insane. So I think also too, there's a sense of loss for people who they may not even be actively trying to get pregnant. I was just kind of listening in on the session with the later Gator. And I think there's just a general grief around childlessness as opposed to child-free, which I think is an important distinction. And Mandy, I met in an incredible event a few weeks ago, and we hit it off. First of all, she's from Virginia, so I knew she was amazing. Because we are both Virginia girls. So I was excited to touch base with her because we had a lot in common. It was actually a grief event for essentially motherless daughters and women who lost their mothers at a very young age, which we both did, and living with long-term grief. And then just doing the work that I do, taking into account, there's a very specific grief around childlessness. And so Mandy works with an organization called the Dinner Party, which deals with grief on a really massive level. And they really take it on. And they do the most amazing events. And so I knew she would be the perfect person to handle this. I am going to allow her to introduce herself, tell us a little bit about her background as well in tech and product, while I deal with making sure that Dr. Wood has the correct link.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ashley. I'm super honored to be a part of today's just overall the summit, the overall discussion, and to get the opportunity to be a part of this session. A little bit about me. So right now, as Ashley mentioned, I'm working with a nonprofit called the Dinner Party. And I've been a participant and a host on many of their events actually for over 4 years now. But the Dinner Party is a platform for grieving, generally speaking, 20, 30, and 40 somethings, folks who've basically experienced loss at a younger than what we would call like a typical age. So the Dinner Party is a platform for those folks to find peer community and build lasting relationships with folks who share that similar age and loss experience. And for a little bit of context, this organization grew literally from one dinner from a group of people in LA, and now that was over 10 years ago. And now the Dinner Party has over 4,000 active members with over 700 virtual tables that spun up literally because of the pandemic worldwide. So in addition to working for that organization, I also host a space. So I bring together folks with different kinds of loss, and I do that virtually, generally from Oakland, California. Today I'm actually in Joshua Tree, California. Before the Dinner Party, I had a past in tech. So I've spent over a decade supporting customers and product development and building corporate cultures at companies I've worked for, which include Netflix, Google, and Airbnb. Thanks again for having me today, Ashley.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm really anxious to learn myself from the expertise of both Dr. Wood and yourself. And my main role here was to introduce, I think Dr. Wood might be having some issues with her camera. Let's try this one more time.
Yay!
There we are.
Yay! Yes.
Yes. So we actually have like a Virginia trifecta here because Dr. Wood is not from Virginia, but she went to UVA. So she went to school at UVA. So yes, I am actually going to remove myself from the equation and enjoy being in the audience. Thank you both so much for joining us, and anxious to listen to this conversation.
Awesome. Thanks again, Ashley.
Okay.
Cool. I wanted to maybe kick off our conversation a little bit with connecting a few dots, a little bit between the world that I know through the dinner party. I was reminded of something in trying to do that, of thinking how to connect those dots. I was reminded of something that a good friend that I met through the dinner party told me recently about the complexities of pregnancy loss and infertility. This is based on her own personal experience, as well as some experiences she's had, friends with similar experiences. And I'm paraphrasing what she told me, but basically what she said was, unlike losing a living loved one with reproductive issues, you often experience grief over and over and over again. And you can lose a sense of hope around possible solutions touted as the answer if you continue to experience problems even with those solutions along your journey, which is something, when she was relaying that to me, that was something that really kind of sat heavy. And I was thinking a lot about how those wounds and grief can really be amplified around the holidays, which is why I'm so pleased to introduce everyone here to Dr. Tonya Wood. Welcome again.
Thank you.
And so just to give a little bit more context about Dr. Wood, she's a licensed psychologist with more than 20 years of experience specializing in working with individuals and couples experiencing infertility, pregnancy loss, and considering third-party reproductive assistance. Dr. Wood is also the director of clinical training in the Graduate School of Education and Psychology at Pepperdine University, and has provided extensive lectures, training, teaching, and supervision on various subjects, including trauma-informed care, cultural diversity, clinical supervision, psychological assessment, and professional development. And if that wasn't enough, in addition to her clinical practice, Dr. Wood is also the president of the California Psychological Association, no big deal, and is currently a member of the mental health professional group of the American Society for Reproductive Medicine. That's amazing accolades, Dr. Wood. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for the introduction.
Yeah, totally. Before we really dive in, would you mind sharing maybe just a little bit with us about what brought you into your work?
Yeah, absolutely. I've been a psychologist, as your introduction indicated, for a while. I've been here for a minute, 20 years or so, but that hasn't always focused or centered on infertility or family planning loss. And over the course of my professional career, my personal life sort of intersected with that when I myself started on my own family planning process and encountered difficulties that then led me to using fertility treatments and in that process seeking out mental health professional and finding it actually very difficult to find someone who was not necessarily, the interactions I had were positive in that they were kind, compassionate, caring clinicians. Yet it was difficult finding individuals who were well informed to the infertility process, who really understood the specific emotional experience of that, as well as some of the financial and medical procedures involved. And so I often found myself spending more time explaining what the procedures were as opposed to receiving support. And not just difficulty finding my own, mental health provider or support system, professional support system around infertility, but also as a woman of color, finding someone who understood also the specific issues that I encountered as a woman of color. So once I was on the other side of my own infertility process, determined that it might be helpful to others like myself to develop a niche and develop a specific expertise in this as part of my practice. So that's how I organically wound up where I am. Yes.
Yeah, that's great. Wonderful. I have a handful of questions we'll get into, and then we'll open it up for some Q&A. So yeah, I guess just as we go, if folks have some questions that are coming up, you're totally welcome to go ahead and put them in the chat. Awesome. I touched on this a little bit before, but at the dinner party, about different permutations of grief and loss. So as an example, one of our members hosts a grief space called Parents Without Parents, and it's aimed to create peer support for others entering parenthood without parents of their own to help teach and support them. I think there's a sense of grief in all aspects of reproductive challenges, even if you've never lost a pregnancy or a child. So I think I'm really curious, in what ways do you find this particular grief is singular, and how does it show up in women's lives?
Yeah, thank you. I think it's a great question. And it's, I think in part because, especially for women specifically, is that we are, for better or for worse, just socialized. There's so many sort of strong, persistent social messages around womanhood and female identity that is so strongly linked and connected to parenting and motherhood and that experience. And I think there can be this sort of experience of what is known or coined as invisible grief, of that loss of the narrative or story or dream or vision that we had about our lives, our roles as parents, our relationships, and what our future was going to be. And so, like you said, whether or not you've actually experienced the loss of a child, but just that idea of the sense of loss of that identity, or that aspect of an identity that has been put upon us in some ways, through messages and social norms, for better or for worse.
Yeah, totally. Could you, well, let's see, let me back up here. So it's always difficult to deal with the mental and emotional load of infertility. And the holidays are particularly difficult. What are some ways that you recommend women protect themselves during the holiday season, either from episodes that might result in depression or just other negative emotions or outcomes?
Yeah, and I actually really appreciate that you phrased it as a protect themselves during this time, because again, back to sort of that idea of socialization and how women in particular can be socialized to care for others and tend to others during these times, that I think that approaching it from a perspective of like protecting yourself is first of all a very good approach. And what I share with those that I work with and clients that I have is to celebrate the holidays in your way. It's okay to be selective of who you spend your time with and where you go and what you do. And then particularly without apology, without explaining, without apologizing, doing the things that you want to do, as opposed to the things that, restricting yourself from things, because that sort of limiting and restricting can add to and further exacerbate that experience or feeling of loss, what you don't have. So I strongly encourage people to, have it sort of self-protective stance and celebrate your holidays in your way. Take a trip if you want. Well, I guess right now we're not able to take trips, but I think it is identify for yourself how you want to celebrate the holiday and do it your way, with permission to do it, because it is very self-protective.
Great. I had sort of a goofy grin on my face, because that's the kind of thing that we talk a lot about at the dinner party, of what does that sort of self-care or self-protection, or to sort of turn around and think about it a different way, the sort of almost like new ritualization look like. Yeah.
And it can I add to that? I think
yeah, please.
The question that you just asked previously about that sort of singular grief that may be specific to women, is that I think what comes along with it, sort of behind the grief or alongside the grief, is that almost sort of a sense of guilt or shame that you even have that feeling. Like it should not be hard for me, or I should be able to go. And I think that's another thing we have to give ourselves permission to be like, no, but you are feeling this way and you do have these feelings, and it is okay to say, yeah, this year, this won't be the best thing for me. And allowing ourselves that flexibility of also not bearing the burden of being responsible for other people's feelings at this time. Yes.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Let's see. So sort of building on that a little bit, could you share some examples of helpful tips to diffuse pressure or deal with comments about one's family building, in particular, maybe if you haven't shared your own infertility struggle with many people.
Yeah, and this is always, I think, a tough challenge for individuals who are anticipating the comments, the questions from well-intended family members or friends. I like to go with humor often. I when I was in the mix of my own process, I had my sort of one-liner quips that I would, sort of lob at people when they asked me certain things or made certain comments like, just relax or don't stress, or if you need more practice, all the kinds of things that people say. And I recognize at the moment it was a delicate balance because my humor is mostly sarcasm, which has a little bit of anger to it, but but using humor just to kind of sort of quell and diffuse the comments. But I think also doing some preemptive planning and enlisting the help of someone, a partner or friend or another family member who maybe does know what's going on, and so they can sort of distract, deflect, jump in, like, oh, hey, did I show you that book that I got the other day? So bringing in someone to kind of help, so you're not feeling like you're having, again, to manage your own emotions and other people's emotions at the same time. Or a couple ideas that immediately come to mind. Did I lose Mandy?
Oh, hear you. Oh, there you are.
There you are. Okay,
we're back. Cool.
Okay, great.
Yep. And sort of, I guess we'll continue this sort of theme. Do you generally recommend your patients are honest and transparent with those around them about their struggles, or is it more important to protect the privacy of their journey if that's what they want?
That depends. And I actually get that question a lot about, like, should I tell or should I not tell? Who should I tell? And my answer is, it depends. What I encourage my clients to think about is what they feel like they will need during this time regarding support and getting comfort, et cetera. And, and organize, again, what you do say or who you tell around the premise of, like, how will I best get my needs met? And if the best way to get your needs met is to know that you have that one or two persons that you can call up in a moment of anxiety or fear, then tell those people. If you need to tell people so that you can tell them, I don't want to talk about this, and I need you to know I just don't want to talk about it. Let them know that. But if it is something that you would rather keep private as a self-protective stance, then do that. So I say it depends, because I think we all, especially talking about like grief and emotions, we all experience and express grief in many different ways. But I think it's really important to know what your own needs are and what's going to be most important and helpful for you to get through these difficult times.
Yeah, that's great. It sort of reminds me of a thing that sometimes friends or partners can do, of almost like having a safe word in certain situations of, like, what is your exit strategy, or what is another way to lean on another for that strategy.
Exactly.
Cool. And so in what ways do you imagine for this holiday season, so with the very added complexities of the COVID pandemic, might be better or worse for women struggling with reproductive challenges?
Yeah, well, the ways that I imagine that it's a little bit better is because it actually builds in an automatic excuse to avoid those family visits that you didn't want to go to anyway, or that you were worried about. And so it offers kind of a very, sort of convenient reason that's not about you, at all. So that, I think that is one helpful way. I think a way that it could be worse is, I guess on the flip side of that is that sort of that increased isolation and time away from others could add to that feelings of, like, loneliness and being alone and feeling alone, which often comes along with infertility anyway, that individuals, couples can feel like they're the only ones going through this and they have no one to talk to. So it could potentially, I guess, exacerbate those feelings of loneliness. And just in another sort of more practical way that it also could negatively influence right now is potentially delays in treatment. I don't know kind of currently right now, but I know, like, earlier on in our, like, shelter in place mandates that there was a pause on any infertility treatments that were not seen as essential. And depending on where people were and what phase of of infertility treatments they were in or process of family building, many of my clients experience pause or delays. And the time is such a precious commodity that can take its toll on individuals also. So I do worry that, as we are seeing, I know see some surges, and wonder if there can be decisions made to delay treatment for people who've been ramping up and thinking that this would be the time of year that they would be proceeding with certain interventions or not.
Yeah. Do any, just to kind of maybe follow up on that a tiny bit, do any particular strategies come to mind in that vein, like around, just strategies around those delays?
Yeah, and it sort of touches on sort of a very broad strategy in general, because time and the loss of time is often a very consistent theme that I see in my practice with the individuals I work with who just feel like time is passing. And especially this time of the year around the holidays, it's like, it's another marker, right? Because in our minds, we've told ourselves, this time next Christmas, I will be in this situation, or this time next year, I will see this, or this will have happened. It's the end of the year, so we're getting ready to bring in a new year. And so those are markers for passage of time. And so in my work, I often have clients try to commit to sort of being in the present moment with all of this, right? And that a large part of the emotional distress that we are experiencing, not just around infertility, but specifically around infertility, is like that sense of pain and loss that we talked about at the very start of that narrative and that story. So we get attached to that idea of, by this Christmas, this will happen, or by this time, this will happen. And so I try to help them not be so attached to that story and that timeline, and to be very present and mindful in the moment, and living in the here and now in the present. So it's a very broad way of like the technique and strategy, but it's pretty consistent with the my work with clients anyway, because usually that's one of the most stressful things that people encounter, is this idea of like time passing and frequent disruptions and delays and curveballs thrown their way that takes them out of their sort of expected hopes and dreams and time frames of when they would be doing what.
Yeah,
it's easier, and I acknowledge it is a lot easier said than done. It's so much easier said than done. So yeah.
It's sort of, I don't know from personal experience, but it's kind of like, my understanding is just if there was no pandemic, these themes around time not necessarily being as expected are pretty normal occurrence. And so just to have this particular climate and sort of the unknowns going into both the end of this year as well as going into the beginning of next year, it's like recognizing the best ways to just sort of manage those expectations on your own.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. We have about 10 minutes. And so what I'm going to do now is just sort of take a closer look at the chat. So I want to invite everyone who's watching right now, if you have some reflections or questions that came up as we were chatting, if you wanted to throw those in the chat, that'd be awesome. Oh, cool. I was just looking at Amaris's comment about meditation being helpful in these times too. Dr. Wood, in your practice, is that something that you touch on or work with folks as well?
Yeah, absolutely. It is a very helpful tool and strategy, especially what I was speaking to before about making contact with the present moment, which is how I talk about it with my clients, that we can get caught up in the future, like what will happen or what will not happen. We can also be caught up in the past, like if only I had started this 6 months ago, if I had started this 2 years ago, if I hadn't delayed, I hadn't put my career first, whatever. And so mindfulness and meditation becomes a huge part of that, sort of increasing contact with the present moment and focusing on the here and now and where we are. And a large part of my work is guided by helping clients. And it sounds counterintuitive, but I invite them to experience the emotions that they're having, because a lot of the behaviors that we can engage in are about avoiding or distracting us from what we are experiencing. And the work that I do is about accepting and acknowledging that those emotions are very real and understandable emotions in reaction to things that have happened to you. And we increase our suffering by then judging ourselves for having those feelings and emotions, and by not allowing ourselves to kind of see them out to resolution. And so again, that's where the mindfulness and meditation can come in as very useful interventions and techniques, for sure.
Yeah, I love that so much. Just very much the reminder, both to sort of allow yourself to work through, but also to potentially keep yourself out of that spiral.
Yes,
yeah, thank you.
Exactly.
Awesome. I'm going to get into some of these comments. They're great.
Okay.
So from Ashley, thanks, Ashley. What would you recommend for anyone who has someone dealing with infertility in their life, a friend or a sister, et cetera? What's the best way to engage this person and be a source of support?
Yeah, I think, and I wish more people would think about that question and ask. I think the one thing is just ask them, what can I do for you? What do you need from me? What can I do? Let me know, how to approach you, like because sometimes, and again, it varies by individuals, right? But sometimes people are like, just don't ask me. I'll let you know when something's going on. I'll come to you and tell you, or be that person who kind of distracts, deflects, or take the pressure off. I think the best thing is just to reach out and say, hey, I don't know what the right thing to say is, and I don't want to say something inadvertently. So just tell me what you need and how I can be of help and support to you.
Great. Your comment about one-liner answers is getting a lot of traction in the chat.
Okay.
So the question is if you would mind sharing some of those responses that you've used.
Yes. Okay. Sure. It's been a few years, but I think I can remember them. Like, I think one that would always come was like, because my family's fairly religious, and so they would always have like a lot of religious references, turn it over to God or whatever, or when are you guys going to plan? And so one of my one-liners was like, I don't know, I don't have a direct line to God. Do you? Ask him. Especially like, when are you going to get pregnant, or when are you going to have a kid? I'm like, I don't know. So that would be one that, I would have to be cautious of how that would land with some people. That was one of it. The one about stress, just like relax. I'm pretty sure people in war-torn countries get pregnant all the time. It's not about stress. Again, I warned you too, these are sarcastic. So the thin line between humor and, sarcasm. But it's also very true, and if people didn't know that what I was doing in terms of my infertility treatments, which I did IVF. And so they would be like, oh, we can, you need to know how to practice. And I was like, sure. If you want to show me how to like stick a needle in my arm, help me out, because that's how I'm going to end up getting pregnant. So things like that would be some things that I would say, but maybe the more innocuous one is like, yeah, I don't know. Do you have a direct line to God? I don't know either.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I'm gonna relay this from L. Francis Brown. Okay. So the comment here is, years ago when I saw women with small children during times when I was at my lowest yearning, it would make me sad. What could I do to counteract those feelings?
Again, I mentioned before that usually my work seems counterintuitive. So it might seem weird, but I would say invite the sadness, because the sadness means there's something about this that's important to you. And so, and we don't want to experience the sadness, but we also don't want to make it prolonged. And so, and I know that may seem weird that I say like invite the sadness. You're like, what? You want to be more sad? Like, I just want you to acknowledge that it's presence, that it's there, and be like, okay, yeah, you're reminding me that this is something that's important to me that I miss. So instead of sort of trying to fight it or ignore it, just like acknowledge it and say like, okay, yeah, you're reminding me that this is something important to me. And then I think a next step could be, depending on where you are in your process and what you decide is like, and what can I do in my life? What actions can I take that will build upon that? Like whatever the value purpose of that for you. In my work, I use something called acceptance and commitment therapy, and there's an aspect of it that's about values-driven actions. And so thinking about like, what is it that I want my life to be about, and what's, you know, sort of the purpose of my life, not necessarily a goal, right? Like maybe having a family, becoming pregnant is a goal, but what's the value? Is that about connecting to others? Is it about nurturing others? Like, what's the value there? And so when you acknowledge the sadness, and then you can say like, that reminds me that I'm missing something that's of importance to me. And what is it that I'm missing? And what is it that I can do that matches that value? So do I need to call somebody? Do I need to journal? Do I need to visit friends? Do I need to reach out? Would be my long answer to the question of how to counteract that, because it's hard to not experience the sadness. It's just, I would say, impossible to not experience it because it is there.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Hopefully it was helpful. I know people always like, what, you're telling me to be sad? Yeah.
This comes up in grief circles a lot too, you know, certainly not related to reproductive challenges, but, and this might sound, I have a similar reaction to this where it might sound a little extreme, but it's that this idea that you're feeling the sadness, that's the counterweight to how important that thing is. So the thing that you're yearning for, feeling sad about, it's actually your signal that like, wow, this is really important to me. And so it's hard sometimes to feel, I guess I'll say like grateful for that feeling or for that experience. But at least for myself, that's been a way that's kind of like helped anchor me in terms of going through the feeling as opposed to maybe around it. Yeah. Cool. Let's see. Okay, I'm getting back into the chat here a little bit.
Okay.
So this is from Karina Jimenez. Any ideas for responding to a mom with kids who constantly says, you're lucky you don't have to deal with kids and work. You just have work to focus on. I want to respond with something that isn't very kind. So any advice would be helpful.
Okay. Well, Karina, I don't know that I have anything that's not kind either to respond back to. I think I even took a breath as I was hearing the question, right? That thing that you're so lucky. I think that's the part that like is like, you know, like you're so lucky. And I think in that moment I'd be like, I am more than just my work. And how fortunate you get to experience more than just work. Because I think that's what it is, right? It's like, yeah, I'm yeah. And I again, that's the kindest, I think, because it's honest and it's authentic. And it's like, yeah. And you're so lucky that you get to be more than just your work.
Yeah. Yeah. No, thanks. That's a tough. And similar, this was coming up. Aaron Cummings posted this for any ideas around good responses to the "why don't you just adopt" question.
Yeah. Again, I take a deep breath first. Because I think that before I get to what the answer will, a good response would be, or a response will be, I think I want to get at like what that response suggests. Right. And it actually, I think, dismisses like all of the complexities of this infertility process that you're going through and that you're experiencing. It's kind of like how we started, right? That there's other kinds of like attachments to the idea of creation and whatever this is about for you. And there's no wrong or right to that. And I think there's sort of this, it just sort of dismisses that there's any other part about the process of childbearing and parenting and child rearing that is just solved by that answer. And so it's just very hurtful. So a way to respond of why don't you just adopt is, you know, because I want to try all the possible ways to create my family. I'm exploring all the ways that I can create my family. Doesn't mean I may not at some point adopt, but I think I have the right to explore all the ways to build my family.
Oh, I love that so much. That's great. Thank you. I wanted to do a little quick time check. Ashley, I know you're listening in. I think we're right at time. So just wanted to make sure, or maybe if there's any closing thoughts here. Well, maybe one more, maybe while Ashley pops back in, there's one last question from Sade Moore. So let's sneak it in. What advice would you give someone who's still building themselves financially, but still has yearning for family, or people that tell you shouldn't be concerned with building a family if you don't have work?
Oh, goodness. It's almost back to what the question I just said before about, like, I have the right to explore and build a family in the way that I want to. And there is no right time for any of this. And I think that, as I've said before, I think time is a precious commodity that people often feel like they waited until the time was right, until they had the money and they were in the right situation. But family planning, growing your family, loving other human beings, there's no right or wrong time for that. And so I think my response to people might be, I want to build my family my own way and time and place. I appreciate you for being so concerned about my capacity to do it, but I've thought long and hard about this, and I know what I'm doing. But in terms of the actual logistical, pragmatic question about financially building up self and preparing for this, there are lots of programs that are out there with scholarships, not the right word, but grants and funding to help assist individuals, couples who are in this process, who are looking for ways to try to fund any infertility treatments that they are considering, are in the middle of. So I say do some research and explore and see what kinds of grants or funding might be out there. Check your insurance companies. We're doing a little bit better with insurance companies reimbursing for some of these treatments. But yeah, so I would say there is a financial cost, but that should not be the only hurdle, because there are also some financial resources that are out there too.
Awesome. Cool. All right. Dr. Wood, your advice is invaluable. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. I'm glad that it was helpful to those out there who are dealing with this right now.
Thank you both so much. It was even more inspired than I thought that it would be, and I really appreciate both of you. I dropped the link for the dinner party, as well as Dr. Wood's personal website, in the chat. So please click through and visit. Dr. Woods she's probably doing virtual right now during the pandemic.
I am.
Located in Los Angeles. So for everybody in LA, when things are a little bit back to normal and you're able to see somebody in person, she would be your person.
Yes.
Thank you, everybody.
Awesome.
We have about 2 minutes and then the next session will start. So hang tight. That one is about the evolution of family and third-party assisted reproduction, egg donors, sperm donors, surrogates. All right. See you soon.
Great. Thanks, y'all.
Bye.
Thank you so much.